Snow moved like a living thing across the open plains, sweeping low over the dead grass and rattling against the lonely boards of the abandoned line shack. The wind howled through broken seams in the walls, slipping through every crack as though trying to pry secrets from the trembling figure crouched beside the dying fire. Elias Ward had not slept in 2 days. His breath came in thin, shuddering ribbons as he stared at the flames, watching them shrink lower and lower, each flicker a heartbeat closer to darkness. Outside, the storm swelled again, the kind that buried cattle and swallowed entire trails without a trace. His coat was torn from the last 2 nights of running, one sleeve missing, the lining ripped out to bind a wound across his ribs. His cheeks burned with cold, but the rest of him felt hollow, numb, weightless. The world outside had gone white. The world inside had gone quiet. He kept replaying the gunshot, one crack, like the breaking of a bone. Then Clara's hand slipping from his, her face slack with shock before the fire took the house behind her. Smoke, flames, the roof giving way. His sister's scream swallowed by everything he didn't reach fast enough, everything he couldn't stop. And then the riders came. Their torches lit the night like falling stars, their voices sharp as glass. "Bring the boy," someone shouted. "He's got answers." But Elias had none. Only guilt, only ashes, only the sound of his sister's name dissolving in the firelight. So he ran. Now the storm was his captor. The cold its weapon. He leaned back against the wall, trying to slow his ragged breathing, listening to the screech of the wind as if it were calling his name. He knew the men weren't far. He'd seen the tracks that morning before the snow swallowed him again. He didn't know what they believed he'd done. Maybe they'd seen him running from the fire. Maybe that was enough. The fire in the shack cracked softly. Elias closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. It never did anymore, not since the flames took Clara, not since he walked away from the grave with nothing but silence burning in his chest. A sudden thud snapped his eyes open. The door rattled on its hinge, shaken not just by wind but by weight. Boots, hoof, something pressing close. Elias froze, breath caught high in his throat. The storm hissed outside like the world itself was holding still. Another thud, closer this time. He reached for the only thing resembling a weapon, a broken stove poker lying beside the fire. His bandaged ribs screamed in protest as he lifted it, but he gripped tighter, forcing numb fingers to obey. A shadow slid beneath the crack of the door. Tall, still, waiting. Elias's heart pounded so loud he wondered if the stranger could hear it. The shack door creaked. It didn't open, just shifted against the wind, like something bigger than the storm pressed on it from the outside. He stepped back. The fire sputtered. Snow drifted through the gaps like ash. Then, silence. The kind of silence that makes the air feel sharper, colder. Elias's breath fogged the room as he waited, poker raised, ready for the crash of boots, the barrel of a rifle, the cold press of iron at his neck. But nothing happened. The shadow moved away, swallowed by the white. Minutes passed before he lowered the poker again. He didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. He tried to warm his hands over the fire, but the flames were nearly gone now, only a thin line of orange clinging to the last log. He needed more wood, but stepping outside meant stepping into the storm, and into the path of whoever had been standing there. He had no choice. Before he could talk himself out of it, he wrapped his torn coat tighter around his shoulders and pushed the door open. Snow slapped him instantly, sharp as needles. The sky had gone iron gray, the clouds hanging low and heavy like bruises. The wind tore at him as he fought forward. He moved toward the trees just beyond the ridge. The storm thickened, swirling around him in blinding bursts. Every few steps he had to stop, breathe, steady himself. That was when he saw it. A horse, standing still among the blowing snow, dark against the pale earth, its reins dragging through the drift. Steam rose faintly from its nostrils, but no rider was in sight. Elias felt the back of his neck prickle. He scanned the ridge, the rocks, the distant line of cottonwoods. No footprints showed through the flakes now, no sign of movement. But he knew someone had tied that horse there recently, and they couldn't have gone far in this storm. A gust of wind nearly knocked him off balance. He pressed a hand to his ribs, teeth clenched. The horse didn't bolt, it only watched him, ears flicking forward. A faint sound carried through the storm. Not the wind, not an animal, a voice, low, weak. Elias turned. There, half buried in the snow behind a fallen log, something moved. He staggered closer until the form took shape, a small figure curled tightly beneath a wool blanket soaked with ice, trembling violently. Bare hands protruded from the edges, blue with cold. The face was hidden, but the breathing was fast, shallow. Panicked. A child. Elias's breath caught. The storm howled, tearing at his coat. He crouched, pulling the blanket back just enough to see dark lashes stuck together with frost, lips cracked and pale, cheeks bruised from cold. Whoever the rider had been, the child wasn't them. He lifted the small body gently. Too light, too cold. The child whimpered weakly, fingers twitching at the sudden movement. Elias wrapped the blanket tighter, pulling the thin figure against his chest. Cold shot through him like a blade. The wind rose again, turning the world white. He looked around, heart pounding. No riders, no prints, no sign of the one who left the child here. Only the horse watching him, silent and unmoving. He didn't have time to question it. The shack was his only shelter. He pushed through the storm with the child in his arms, stumbling against the wind. Snow smothered their path almost instantly. Twice he fell to his knees. Twice he forced himself up again, teeth gritted against the freezing pain ripping through his ribs. By the time he reached the shack, he could barely feel his hands. Inside, the fire was nearly gone. He knelt beside it, the child's eyes fluttered open, dark, unfocused, full of fear. Elias pressed a trembling hand against their cheek. Too cold, too close to losing them. He needed wood, but if he left again, the storm might take him too. He hesitated only a second. Then he tore the remaining boards off the back wall. His fingers split open on splinters, but he didn't stop. He fed the pieces into the fire until the flames rose bright again, licking warmth into the freezing air. The child stirred. Elias pulled his coat off and wrapped it over them. Their shivering slowed a little, breath steadier now. He rubbed their hands between his, trying to pull warmth back into their fingers. A small whisper seeped through cracked lips. Mama. Elias's throat closed. Images of Clara in the fire flashed before him. Her hand slipping from his. Her voice fading under the roar of collapse. He blinked hard. You're safe, he whispered, voice soft, uneven, the words almost foreign in his mouth after days of silence. Stay with me. The child didn't respond, but their breathing grew less frantic. He stayed beside them until the shaking eased. Then he sagged back against the wall, exhaustion washing through him like a tide. He watched the fire flicker on the child's face, casting soft shadows across the shack. Outside, the storm screamed against the door, as if trying to claw its way inside. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know who had left them, or whether the men hunting him were close enough to see his tracks. But he knew one thing. He would not let another life slip from his hands. Not again. A sharp crack outside jolted him upright. Not thunder, not the wind. Gunfire, distant, but moving closer. Elias's pulse spiked. He crawled to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. At first he saw only swirling white. Then he saw movement. A dark shape on horseback pushing through the storm. Then a second. A third. Lantern light flickered between them. The riders. He stumbled back from the window, breath catching. The child whimpered at the sudden tension in the air. Elias covered their small form with his torn coat again, pressing a finger to his lips. The riders were too close. His heart hammered. The flames crackled. The wind pounded the walls. The riders drew nearer, silhouettes emerging in the white haze like ghosts. He had nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. No weapon but a stove poker and a dying fire. The child's fingers clutched at his sleeve. He swallowed hard. Outside, hooves slowed. Lanterns bobbed. Voices murmured. The riders had reached the shack. Snow scraped under boots. Someone approached the door. The wind fell quiet, as if holding its breath. Elias held his too. Then a heavy hand struck the door. Inside, a voice shouted, rough, commanding, too close. We know you're in there. Open up. Elias pressed the child against his chest, his pulse roaring in his ears. A second voice joined the first. Lower, angrier. Break the damn door. The handle rattled. Elias tightened his hold on the child. The door shuddered. The wind wailed. The fire gutted. And the world felt like it was about to crack open. The door quivered under the force of the blows. Snow drifted from the rafters as the wood strained against the hinges. Elias backed away, pulling the child with him, pulse hammering against his ribs like a fist from inside. The riders outside barked orders over the roar of the storm. Lantern light bled through the window slats, painting jagged streaks across the floorboards. Another blow hit the door, this one heavier, more deliberate. Elias scanned the tiny room. No back exit. No cellar. The walls were thin enough to break through, but the moment he stepped outside with a child in his arms, the riders would take him down before he crossed 10 paces. The door shook again. He tightened his grip on the stove poker, though it felt laughably small against whatever rifles waited outside. Then the blows suddenly stopped. Silence swept in, cold and tense. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. A crunch of snow shifted outside, someone moving, stepping to the side. Elias froze. He strained to listen. A voice, low, steady, unmistakably close, spoke through the crack of the door. "You're running out of places to go." Elias clenched his eyes shut. He knew that voice, not from memory, but from dread. The one that had shouted his name the night Clara died, echoing through the burning dark. It belonged to the man who believed Elias had lit the fire, the man who'd sworn to drag the truth from his throat even if he tore the frontier apart doing it. Marshal Brannock. The storm hissed around his silhouette through the window frost. "Open the door," Brannock said quietly. "Before the cold finishes what we came to do." The child stirred in Elias's arms, a weak cry muffled against his coat. He pressed a hand over their back, instinctively shielding them from the voice. "I know you're not alone in there," Brannock called, tone sharpening. "Saw the tracks. Small prints. You hiding a witness. A hostage." Elias's breath hitched. The child wasn't his hostage. He didn't even know their name. But if Brannock believed otherwise. The marshal's boots crunched closer. A lantern lifted. Its light pierced the crack under the door, gold and hungry. Elias whispered to the child, barely a thread of sound. "Stay behind me." He eased them back toward the corner, wrapping the coat tighter around the thin body. Their eyes, half open, followed him with a mix of fear and confusion. He wished he had something, anything, to offer them besides trembling hands and a failing plan. Brannock's shadow leaned toward the window. "Last chance, boy." The handle rattled. The child whimpered. Elias braced himself. The door exploded inward. Cold slammed into the shack, snow swirling across the floor. Lantern light flooded the room, followed by 3 dark figures pushing through the storm like wolves breaking into a den. Elias raised the stove poker. A rifle barrel met it mid-swing. Steel clanged. Elias staggered backward. The world blurred as the marshal stepped in first, coat flapping in the wind, snow caught in his beard, eyes sharp as winter ice. 2 deputies flanked him, rifles low but ready. Brannock stared Elias down, jaw tight. "You should have run farther," the marshal growled. Elias's chest tightened. "There's a child." Brannock's eyes flicked to the corner. The 2 deputies followed his gaze, raising their lanterns higher. The child shrank back, clutching Elias's coat with frail fingers. The marshal's expression shifted, confusion, then caution, then something darker. "What's that kid doing here?" "I found them outside," Elias said, voice rough. "Half buried in the snow. They were freezing." Brannock took a slow step forward. "You expect me to believe that? She would have died if I'd left her." Brannock stiffened at the pronoun. Elias realized his slip. The marshal's eyes sharpened. "You checked?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't know. He hadn't checked anything beyond the rise and fall of tiny breaths. The storm shrieked through the open doorway, whipping snow across the lantern flames. Brannock motioned to his nearest deputy. "Get the kid." Elias stepped between them before he could think. "Don't touch her." The deputy froze mid-step. Brannock's jaw flexed. "Move, Elias. Not until you tell me why you're hunting me." Brannock's face hardened. "You know damn well why. Your sister's house burned with her inside. And you were the only one seen running from the flames." Elias felt every word like a blow to the ribs. "I didn't light that fire." "Then why'd you run?" Elias swallowed, throat tight. "Because I heard riders shouting my name. Because I saw torches. Because I knew you'd think the worst." Brannock stepped closer until their breaths collided in the cold air. Running made it the truth. "I lost my sister." Elias's voice cracked, raw with grief he'd tried to bury under miles of snow. "I didn't kill her." Wind punched through the doorway again. Lanterns flickered. Snow hissed against the floorboards. The child coughed, a small, weak sound that snapped everyone's attention back to her. Brannock crouched slightly, studying the tiny form wrapped in Elias's coat. She blinked at him with slow, unsteady eyes. Her lips were nearly purple. "She's freezing," Brannock muttered. "We need to get her warm," Elias said. "We?" Brannock shot him a sharp look. Before any answer could form, another gust tore through the shack, strong enough to rattle the lanterns and blow one deputy's hat off his head. Brannick turned toward the open doorway. A figure stood in the storm, barely visible through the swirl of snow. Still, watching. The deputies stiffened instantly, rifles lifting in unison. Elias's breath caught. The figure stepped closer, slow, deliberate, dragging something behind them through the drift. Not a weapon, a body. The storm parted just enough to reveal the truth. It was a woman, staggering, her cloak torn, hair plastered to her face with ice. She kept one hand on the limp body she pulled, a man, by the looks of it, face down in the snow. Blood trailed behind him in a thin, dark line. The woman collapsed to her knees. Brannick rushed forward, grabbing her shoulders. "Mom, hey, stay with me." But her eyes rolled back before she could speak. She lay sprawled in the doorway, one arm still draped over the fallen man as if refusing to let go even in unconsciousness. The deputies dragged the body inside. The man had a gunshot wound across his back, fresh, bleeding through the snowpack on his coat. Elias's skin pricked with dread. Someone else was out there. Someone who'd shot this stranger and left a child to freeze. Someone following the same storm trail. Brannick knelt beside the wounded man, pressing his hand over the wound. "He's still warm. Close the damn door, both of you." The deputies obeyed, slamming the door shut. The shack dimmed again, the roar of the storm muffled but relentless outside. Elias stared between the unconscious woman, the bleeding man, and the child trembling behind him. The walls felt smaller now. The air heavier. Brannick looked up at Elias, suspicion creeping into his expression. "You know these people?" Elias shook his head. "Never seen them." The marshal didn't look convinced. "Funny how trouble keeps finding you." Elias didn't rise to the bait. His focus was on the child, still shivering violently despite the rising fire. He knelt beside her, lifting her gently. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, exhausted. Brannick saw the gesture, the way the child clung to Elias, and something unspoken shifted behind his eyes. Not trust, not forgiveness, but doubt, maybe, doubt in his own assumptions. He stood slowly. "Nobody leaves this shack. Not tonight." Elias met his gaze. "Someone shot that man. They're out there." Brannick's hand ghosted over his holstered revolver. "Then let them come." A sudden crack echoed across the plains. A rifle shot. Close. Everyone froze. Then another shot, closer still, splintered the edge of the doorframe. Wood exploded inward, showering the floor with shards. The deputies dove for cover. Brannick grabbed the lantern, lowering it. Elias shielded the child with his body. The shack fell to near darkness, lit only by the trembling fire. Bootsteps crunched outside, slow, measured, coming straight toward the door. Brannick whispered toward Elias without looking away from the shadows creeping under the threshold. "Get the kid back." Elias moved quickly, pulling her deeper into the corner. Her small hands clung desperately to his shirt. The woman on the floor groaned faintly. The wounded man let out a low, pained breath. Brannick drew his revolver. The riders who hunted Elias had been a threat. But this was different. This was deliberate, silent, patient. A lone figure outside the shack. A predator. Elias heard the breath in Brannick's chest tighten. Snow shifted outside the door. A gloved hand gripped the handle. Turned it. Then, stopped. Silence stretched so long Elias felt it pulsing in his veins. Then a voice came through the door, calm, low, eerily steady. "Hand over the child." Brannick's finger tightened on the trigger. "Or everyone in that room dies tonight." The fire snapped. The storm howled. The deputies swallowed fear. Elias held the child tighter. Her small heartbeat fluttered against his. And the man outside waited, patient as death. The storm screamed against the shack, rattling the boards like a beast clawing to get in. Elias felt the child shaking in his arms, her breath quick and shallow against the crook of his neck. Brannick held his revolver steady, though Elias could see the tension in his arm, the tightness in his jaw. The deputies looked at each other, silent fear flickering in their eyes. Outside, the man's voice came again, patient, poised, as if the storm were nothing more than a curtain he could part with his hands. "Open the door." Nobody moved. "Give me the child," he continued, the words slicing clean through the wind, "and I'll let the rest of you walk away." Brannick exhaled a thin, dangerous breath. "You go to hell." A brief pause, then the faint crunch of a single step in the snow. Elias felt the shift in the air, like the plains themselves were holding still. He didn't know much about violence beyond ranch brawls and barnyard scraps, but he knew enough to recognize a man who killed without hurry. Whoever he was, He had shot one stranger, chased another, and left a child half dead in the snow. And now he wanted her back. Elias looked down at the girl. Her eyes were barely open, unfocused, but she clung to him with a fierceness that tore through him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her fingers trembled against his chest, weak but urgent, as though she already understood what the voice outside meant. Brannick glanced at Elias. "Stay low." Elias nodded. Everyone waited. In the next heartbeat, the door shattered inward. A rifle blast punched through the wood just inches from Brannick's ear. He ducked, rolling across the floor as snow exploded into the shack. The deputies fired into the white blur beyond the doorway, but the wind swallowed their shots. Another blast came from outside, one clean, precise crack. A deputy collapsed, blood blooming across his shoulder. He gasped, clutching his arm as Brannick dragged him behind the stove. Elias pressed the child against his chest, shielding her as splinters rained over them. The wounded woman on the floor moaned softly, half conscious. The man lying beside her groaned, blood spreading in a slow, dark pool. Brannick shouted over the storm. "You going to talk it out, coward? Or step in like a man?" The only response was the faint metallic click of a rifle bolt resetting. Brannick's eyes hardened. He leaned toward Elias. "Back wall. There's a gap behind the crates." Elias looked. A narrow crawl space, small, dark, barely big enough for the child. "Hide her there," Brannick whispered. Elias froze. "What about you?" "We'll hold the door." A beat of silence hung between them, heavy, uncertain, human. Then another blast blew through the window, shattering the remaining glass. Elias reacted before he could think. He scooped the girl into his arms and crawled low across the floor, keeping his head down as bullets tore splinters from the walls. She whimpered softly, face buried against his collarbone. Elias moved faster, heart punching hard in his chest. The crawl space was barely a recess in the wall, dark, cold, filled with old ropes and brittle hay. Elias pulled away the crates, cleared space with shaking hands, and eased the child inside. Her small fingers clutched his sleeve, refusing to let go. Elias didn't want to let go either. But footsteps crunched outside again, closer now. Heavy, confident. He whispered, "Stay here. Don't make a sound." Her trembling eased, just slightly. He pulled the crates back, leaving only a narrow crack of air. He rose just in time to see the outline of a man step into the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, rifle steady at his hip. Snow caked his coat, melting slowly in rivulets down leather too worn to belong to any lawful rider. His face was shadowed under a hood of fur, only pale eyes visible, sharp and cold. Brannick aimed his revolver. "Drop the gun." The man's lips curled, amused. "You don't have a say here." He raised the rifle. Elias didn't think, he just moved. He lunged for the stove poker lying on the floor. The man fired. The shot grazed Elias's shoulder, spinning him sideways, pain slashing through him like a blade. Brannick's own shot rang out a split second later, missing by inches as the storm pushed at his aim. The stranger ducked behind the doorframe with impossible speed. Two lawmen and a bleeding boy, the stranger called from outside, voice still calm. "And you think you'll keep her from me?" Snow blew into the shack in violent gusts. Brannick wiped blood and frost from his cheek, breathing hard. The wounded deputy lay unconscious beside the stove. The other crouched behind a crate, too afraid to lift his rifle again. Elias pressed a hand against his shoulder. Blood seeped warm between his fingers. Brannick looked at him. "You okay?" "No." "Can you still move?" "Yes." Brannick nodded once. That was all the acknowledgement they needed. A shadow moved near the window. Then another. Footsteps circled the shack. Not one man. 3. Elias's heart dropped. The stranger hadn't come alone. Brannick whispered, "We're boxed in." The storm wailed, driving flurries against the walls so hard the boards creaked. A voice shouted from outside, one of the new men. "Open the door and hand the girl over." The stranger's voice followed, low, controlled. "She belongs to us." Elias shook his head. "She's a child. You don't know what she is," the stranger said. "But we do." He stepped into view again, rifle ready. He fired. The bullet struck the lantern near Brannick. It burst, oil splattering across the floorboards, flames licking instantly at the wood. The shack flashed orange. Brannick cursed. "Put it out." Elias grabbed a blanket, smothering the flames, nearly burning his fingers. Smoke billowed up, thick and choking. The wounded woman coughed weakly, reaching blindly for the man beside her. Outside, the stranger waited. He let the fire weaken them. Let the smoke blind them. Let panic settle in. He was hunting. Brannick staggered to the door, firing blind into the white. Come on then. The storm answered with a roar. Then another figure appeared, bursting through the doorway, a younger man with a wild beard and hungry eyes. Elias barely had time to shout before the man slammed into Brannick, knocking the revolver from his hand. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fists. The third outlaw slipped through the broken window, landing behind Elias. He swung the butt of his rifle. Elias ducked, pain screaming through his ribs. He rammed the stove poker into the man's knee. Bone cracked. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. Brannick rolled, landed a brutal punch across the younger outlaw's jaw, sending blood flying. But the man recovered quickly, tackling him again. The leader, pale eyes gleaming, walked in slowly now, as if entering a church. He stepped over his injured man, rifle trained on Elias. Move aside, he said, or I'll put you down. Elias stood between the man and the crawl space. He didn't feel brave. His hands shook. His shoulder throbbed, but he didn't move. The stranger exhaled through his nose, almost disappointed. So be it. He raised the rifle. A gunshot split the air. The stranger staggered. Brannick, bleeding and half-dazed, had retrieved his revolver with shaking fingers and fired one perfect shot through the outlaw's shoulder. The leader dropped to one knee, snarling in pain. Elias surged forward, swinging the stove poker. It cracked against the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. His rifle flew from his grip and slid across the floor. The outlaw at the window lunged for it. Brannick shot him too, this one in the leg. He fell screaming. The last outlaw, the youngest, froze when he saw his leader collapse. Brannick aimed the gun at him. Don't, Brannick warned. Don't make me. The young outlaw's breath shook. He dropped his weapon. Silence fell again, heavy, shocked, trembling. The fire flickered. The wind moaned. Elias staggered to the crawl space, shoving crates aside. The child blinked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. He lifted her gently into his arms. She clung to him with a sob so soft it nearly broke him. Brannick leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Blood trickled from his temple. He looked at Elias, really looked, through exhaustion and smoke and new understanding. You protected her, Brannick said. Elias nodded, throat tight. Brannick let out a slow breath. Maybe I was wrong about you. The wounded woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw the girl in Elias's arms, and everything changed. Her breath hitched. Tears welled instantly. Lila, she whispered, voice breaking. My baby, Lila. The child turned toward the voice, weak but alive. Ma. The woman sobbed in relief. Brannick helped her sit up, careful of her injuries. The wounded man groaned again, her husband, judging by the way her shaking hand crawled toward him. Elias lowered the child into her mother's trembling arms. The woman held her tight, rocking her gently despite her own bloodied state. She whispered thanks against her daughter's hair, voice soft, desperate, overflowing. Brannick stared at Elias, something unspoken settling in the space between them. Respect, regret, maybe even the beginning of trust. The storm eased at last. The wind softened to a tired sigh. Snow tapped gently against the window frame, no longer trying to break through. The outlaws lay defeated on the floor, one unconscious, one whimpering, the leader bleeding but alive, glaring at Elias with hatred sharp as ice. Brannick holstered his revolver slowly. We'll take them into town. Stand trial. The leader spat blood. She's ours. You don't know what she's worth. Brannick kicked the rifle away from him. She's a child. That's all. The outlaw laughed through cracked teeth. Shows what you know. Brannick didn't respond. He turned to Elias. You saved her life, the marshal said quietly. Elias swallowed hard. I didn't save my sister. Brannick's expression softened. You couldn't have saved her. But you saved this one. Elias looked at the child, Lila, nestled safe against her mother's chest, eyes finally closing in exhausted peace. The mother whispered, thank you, thank you. Elias's throat tightened. He nodded once, unable to speak. Brannick placed a firm hand on Elias's shoulder. Come morning, I'll clear your name. Quote. Elias blinked. You believe me. Brannick looked around the ruined shack, the wounded family, the defeated killers, the child alive only because Elias had chosen to step outside into a storm he had no reason to fight. I believe what I see, Brannick said. The wind carried the last of the blizzard away, leaving the world quiet, white, and trembling with the aftershock of violence. Elias leaned against the wall, breath unsteady, pain humming deep in his ribs. But for the first time since the fire, something warm flickered inside him. Not relief, not forgiveness, but possibility. Brannick helped the wounded deputy stand. The mother kissed her daughter's forehead again and again, tears falling freely. The wounded father opened his eyes just enough to see his family safe. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Clara felt close, not as a wound, but as a whisper carried on the wind. Morning would bring choices, explanations, trials, freedom, maybe, or a different kind of burden. But for now, the storm had passed. Elias breathed in the cold air and let it settle deep inside him. He had saved someone. He had been enough.